Just a little bit about me. My wife, Kelsey, and I are both born and raised East Coast people, and we somehow crash landed in Texas about 3 years ago. And we'll be there for the foreseeable future, so if you need something to pray about tonight, you can pray for us while we try to navigate that culture change. Hey, this wasn't totally in the initial talk, but this was inspired by some things I was thinking about tonight, and I want to just make a quick point to y'all. As you sit in this room and you look around and you connect with each other, one of the things I want you to know is how tight and meaningful the Fellows Network is, and I've really realized it this weekend as we've heard from folks. And so just to point out a couple things to you. So Rose, who you just heard from, and Isaiah, who you heard from this morning, were both in my fellows class, Trinity in Charlottesville, 2007, 2008. Rose and I, our host families, lived next door to each other, so we carpooled everywhere. And Isaiah and I actually lived together for a year in an apartment in downtown Charlottesville after the Fellows program. So we tried to figure out what that transition was like, and don't worry, we didn't get it either. Hunter, Coach Taylor, who you heard from last night, he and I actually live down the street from each other, and we love him and his wife, and they have been such a blessing to us. They moved to Waco a year ago, and we're actually in a small group together, so we really are living that real community, like, hey, your house is over there, and I can see it, and sometimes we borrow eggs from each other. Like, it's that real. And then Sabrina, who you'll hear from and after me, she and her husband moved to Waco too, and she went to William and Mary, which is the town that I grew up in. And so it's amazing how the Fellows program knits you together. And so as you're moving through these conversations and relationships, you never know in 7 years how they're going to reshape. And so be diligent. Don't take these conversations and interactions lightly. These people could leave fingerprints on your life much later on. So as Kate mentioned, I work at Baylor University, where I have the great opportunity to create experiences that help students transition from high school or from other educational situations into college. There's a lot of responsibility there, and a lot of times you just think of that as orientation. But I've come to learn that there's so many things that are wrapped up in creating meaningful experiences that help people realize what it means to thrive as a college student. And as I think about what it means to live a life of sustained faith, one of the things that I really latched onto was this idea of tension, and Rose kind of brought up the word tension in her talk, and I want to kind of draw that thread out a little bit. And I want you to know that when I talk about tension, what I talk about is this idea of the space between things. And those things can be competing, they could just be disparate, there could be two things or maybe more, but maybe you've been in this situation before where you have this idea where you can see multiple sides of things, but you also realize in between them is something heavy, something real, something dense, something that you can feel. And I would name that tension. And there's a reason that when we talk about tension, we're always anchored to this metaphor of being able to cut it with a knife, right? So whenever we talk about tension, we're like, oh, you can just cut it with a knife. That's our easy go-to to how we describe it. And isn't it amazing that when we think about this concept, that we need a tool or something sharp to pierce it and to divide it and to create an avenue for us to move through it, to understand what the parts are all about. And I think a lot of times when we think about tension, it's often caught up in our identity. And what better place to really be in an understanding of how your identity is taking shape and changing and shifting than the time that you spend in a fellows program. Because if you don't know your own identity well, certainly you'll have the opportunity to crash into your other members of your fellows cohorts, oftentimes over and over again, be it at a small group conversation or a roundtable meeting or sometime in your seminary class where all of a sudden you're learning new things about the Bible that you'd never learned before. When we think about our identity, a lot of times our tension is how we perceive ourselves versus the people that we're becoming in the world and the way that other people are reacting to us. There's tension there. Are we the same people that we think we are versus how people are experiencing us? When I came to the Trinity in 2007, it was also another crash landing for me because I had just come out of a season of my own type of tension. I would say that I had an unbelievable college experience, probably ideal, perfect some ways. But I had worked really hard to create a meticulous identity that only had to do a little bit with God. And when I graduated from college, God does that thing that he does sometimes where he sort of brings you back down hard, and he dramatically removed everything that I had worked to create success and happiness and well-being and safety in college, and he pulled it all out from under me when I graduated. And so I spent the summer in tension. And when I came to the fellows program that September to Charlottesville, I was raw, I was vulnerable, I was so ready for something to latch onto and for someone to help me find meaning that it was probably the best way, even though it was the worst way to get there, to come in. Isn't it funny how God always knows what he's doing, but we don't ever really understand until we look back and we go, oh, that's why that was so hard. Because I could start the fellows program without pretense, because the tension had removed that. And as I think about the fellows program and I think about what it means for us to get a hold of something portable, something that helps us understand how to sustain our faith in the culture that we live in the culture that the tension is as Christians, how do we participate in what the world is telling us that we're supposed to value? How do we participate in the good things of the world, but also acknowledge the heaviness and the weight and the brokenness of the world? And I think about one thing that we learned in our seminary class early on. And it's this concept, it sort of fits into with this redemptive narrative of what Christ is doing as he pursues shalom, as we know that he's bringing all things together. And this idea that as Christians, we have the opportunity to look at our culture and we can affirm, critique, and subvert. So for everything that is happening to us, God has created it, and so we know there's good in it, right? We know that, we love that Abraham Kuyper quote where he says, God looks out and says, everything is mine. I've created it and it's good. So we know that there's good in things, but also we know that sin has corrupted and perverted and distorted things. And so there's always something for us to critique. Like, that's not how it was meant to be. Sin has taken that and shifted it and shaped it. But then because we know that Christ is making all things new and that it's his story and he's changing it, that there's always opportunity to subvert something. So we can pick through it and we can say, but the redemption is here. And we know that things are changing. Affirm, critique, subvert. And if that's not the best tool to cut through the tension of our lives as Christians, I don't know what is. And that's one of the most portable things I took away from my experience as a fellows program to help me think about what it means to sustain my faith and to sustain my life in every day. Now, at the risk of destroying any sort of credibility I may have established with you in the last 5 minutes, I want to confess something to you. I love top 40 hip-hop music. It's true. I do. I love it. I've always loved it ever since 1996 when Puff Daddy and the Family first came out. RIP, I was in 6th grade. It started a love affair with top 40 hip-hop music. And if there's no other way to be a Christian and to listen to hip-hop music, it's this idea that you have to affirm, critique, and subvert what's going on there. Am I right? And these days, for some reason, I'm really drawn toward Drake, and I don't know why. And what I love about Drake is he's actually got some skills. Like, there's a lot of, like, he can write, his lyrics are tight, he's got a great self-expression thing going on. There's a lot to affirm about what he's doing. But man, there's a lot to critique, and we don't have to go into any of that stuff now, but it's all there. But when I think about that, when I think about what it means to subvert hip-hop music, I think about people who are doing it well. Not just Lecrae and Tripp and those guys, but they're definitely killing it. But there's a guy named Propaganda who's out there writing lyrics that sound like Drake, that sound like Childish Gambino, but are gospel-heavy, and that really address the issues that we're dealing with in this world. And so, top 40 hip-hop music, there's always some work to do there. What else? The fellows program taught me that the life that we live as Christians is real, and we have to be equipped to move through the tension. We have to have our tools that help us navigate and help us curate and process the signals that the world gives us. Because if we pretend that we can just take in what the world is giving us and consume it, and we don't have to have a critical eye on it, we fool ourselves. And we rob ourselves of any sort of opportunity that we have to think thoughtfully and critically about the messages in our world. And the flip side of that is we can't fortify ourselves either, right? We weren't meant to just wall up and pen ourselves inside and shut culture out. I'm sure you guys have read Niebuhr and Christ and Culture at some point this year, and you know that the 4 things that he talks about the way Christ approaches culture, and we love that 4th one where Christ is sort of redeeming culture and he's participating in it. We weren't meant to fortify, but we were meant to affirm what is good, critique what is sinful, and subvert those things and look forward to the redemptive end of the story. Frederick Buechner, who is another fellow's favorite, is a philosopher that I love, and he has a lesser-known quote other than his quote about calling, but he says this. He says, "Here is the world. Beautiful and terrible things will happen. Don't be afraid." And is there any other way to think about how we navigate tension with our tools than to look at the world and say, beautiful and terrible things will happen, but we are not afraid? And so my challenge to you is as you go through and as you walk through your Christian life on your journey with God, when you meet the tension, that you would be able to affirm, critique, and subvert, and look forward to the end of the narrative that Christ is telling. Thank you.